final slide for today is a comparison of numbers of deaths for different countries.
We learned early on in the pandemic that different countries classify COVID deaths in different ways, depending on what contributed. This slide was soon binned. Fast forward to now, and the focus is on counting cases instead of deaths.
We have 3 other major countries in Europe.
This week, the Chief Medical Officer of England drew international comparisons on cases as justification for the introduction of sweeping new restrictions. But just as ministers decided crude comparisons of COVID deaths was a bad idea, is the same true for comparing COVID cases between countries? Well, it appears there is no internationally agreed definition of what counts as a COVID case.
We found all these cases here, cases there, and we said, just wait a minute, what do we mean by case? Because we have 25 studies, for instance, from all over the globe, and they're all sort of giving slightly different definitions or slightly different meaning to the words. Different bodies give different grades, like a possible, a probable, and a certain case. And others just give a possible case and a certain case. So when we use the word case, we don't really understand what we're talking about.
Around the world, different tests are being used to detect the virus. One of the main ones is polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, which works by detecting viral genetic material. The test sample has to go through a number of cycles in the lab before enough virus is recovered. Just how many cycles can indicate how much of the virus is there, whether it's tiny fragments or lots of whole virus. Ideally, we want to identify people who are infectious, so it's important to know what the cut-off point should be, cycle threshold, to make sure we're detecting live virus and not dead fragments. The question is, at what point does the cycle threshold stop turning up actual cases?
I would like to have somebody in SAGE or somewhere equivalent do a proper review of that question and actually, if they can, give us a clear answer, some clear guidance as to when we should consider somebody is more likely to have leftover RNA and not be currently infectious, and when they're likely to be currently infectious.
Back in March, tests were mainly being used to confirm symptoms. This is standard infectious disease practice. Essentially, the tests were only doing some of the heavy lifting in making a diagnosis. Now, with widespread testing of asymptomatic people both in the UK and internationally, everything rests on the test. So, the kind of test used and the cycle threshold are crucial. Differences in cycle threshold could be crucial. A New York Times study found if higher cycle thresholds are being used, they could be picking up many people who don't have the virus.
It is not the best way to go about this. The comparison is not going to be particularly fruitful for anyone because we don't know. It's like comparing apples to oranges, basically. You need to actually know what the CT value is, what people's cutoffs are, before you can actually compare these results. So we need to have some sort of international standard if we are going to take that approach.
There is another problem with international comparisons. Remember the graph that Professor Whitty used compared case rates in different countries. Now this might be affected by the strategies used. So how many people you're testing, who you're testing, whether you're counting the number of positive tests or the number of positive people. Remember, people may have more than one test. So if we need to be wary about comparing death and case numbers, what about hospital admissions? There's been an uptick in hospital admissions in France and Belgium. The reason for this week's intervention is they fear there will be one here in the UK too. But healthcare systems are different and criteria for admission to hospital or intensive care may be different too. For example, Madrid's Deputy Health Minister told the press they are now admitting all people with pneumonia, something they haven't always done. Can you look overseas and say, oh, look what's happening to their hospitalisations or intensive care?
To do that comparison, which would be very useful, you need a common pathway, treatment pathway, where you say you hospitalize a person of this age with this set of symptoms and this risk factor for this test. And it's it is a common policy. There is no such common policy.
Well, clearly watching and learning from other countries is important. Reading tallies of cases and hospitalisations can only tell us so much.